Hey there, listeners. Welcome to a special quarantine edition of the podcast of Record. You've got Joe and I on the show today. We're both in our respective, well, Joe's actually at the office because Joe likes to go to the office.
But it's a very big office and there's nobody here.
That's true. I'm sitting in my guest bedroom at home like a responsible human being.
I'm doing the I Am Legend approach where I just am alone everywhere I go.
That's perfect. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's great. So we're bringing you a great new episode of the podcast of Record remotely. We would like to give a great shout out to producer Kyle, who I unfortunately was not able to be on his last episode last week
I
because
wonder if he's going to listen to this or if he's like, I'm over that. Said
I
in
don't
like
know.
100 of those things.
I was not available because my wife had recently brought new human life into the world. So I was doing important things at home. But here I am, and he's in the next room. He's not ready for his debut on the podcast yet. But as always, we've got a nice little roundup of news in the marketing and advertising field for you. We've got some hot cultural takes and some deep dives. So, Joe, anything else? We're ready to get
No, let's go
on
into
it.
the news rundown.
All right, so this is out of Axios. Google is going to lift a coronavirus ad ban. So Google will begin to allow some advertisers to run ads across its platform that address the coronavirus, according to a Google memo sent to clients and obtained by Axios. This has actually been a fairly big deal. And not for the reason you might think. I mean, most of the platforms have tried to address this because they're trying to prevent the spread of misinformation about coronavirus. But what's actually happened,
brand safety, that was another big reason.
Yep. But what's actually happened for a lot of brands or organizations on Facebook and Google is that they haven't been able to spend any money promoting their legitimate content about how they're handling coronavirus, which has actually probably stopped some companies from getting critical information out that they wanted to. So
Correct. Like, and I think another issue here is this. I think when you look back in a few years and you look at what's happened to local news, specifically in newspaper and smaller online publishers, that destroyed them because what it basically meant is for a month, every article used the word COVID-19 or outbreak or pandemic or epidemic, and they couldn't run ads on it. So they were having record clicks and then record low revenue per viewer. So that move basically destroyed dozens or hundreds of publishers over the course of 6 weeks. So I mean, there's that aspect to it that I think is overlooked.
So yeah, thanks Google. Appreciate that.
Maybe it was intentional.
I mean, as far as I know, Facebook has not lifted its ban yet, right? So Facebook ads that say coronavirus are still getting caught up, as far as I know.
Yeah, I think maybe they were talking about lifting it a few days ago, I saw.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, this has been an exercise in unintended consequences of social media monitoring.
Of basically everything.
Yeah, but what you see is, Twitter 3 weeks ago was suppressing and removing tweets about wearing a mask.
Mm-hmm.
Turns out those people were right. Facebook the last few days has been removing or suppressing posts about how to make homemade mask or where you can buy mask.
Yeah.
So the problem with turning all of this over to an AI is the AI doesn't know, it doesn't discriminate, it doesn't have context. And so we've had this issue where it's unclear how much misinformation was actually prevented versus how much actual information was put forward. And in fact, what's happened in this whole thing is the government institutions have been responsible for as much misinformation, no matter how well-meaning you think they may or may not be, as any random Twitter account was. And the fact is, a lot of the impetus that came in even to mainstream media sources surfaced from people who understand this stuff on Twitter talking about this in late January and February. So, I mean, to me, this is a victory for a free and open internet because it forced things to be dealt with sooner.
I, sir, am shocked to find gambling going on in this establishment.
Yeah, shocked.
The government didn't do us justice. I don't know what to do with myself.
Well, I mean, not just the government, right? Like any institution ended up handling this.
Any globalist institution.
Any globalist institution. We can't trust the Chinese Communist Party. I don't understand.
Or the UN, for that matter.
Yeah. But I think that's one of the big things we're going to see is the tide turn because of this. One, on big tech. I think this is a big tech PR bailout, right?
Mm-hmm.
They probably won't need a finance bailout. It'll be a PR bailout because they're the ones people are spending time with. they're getting credit for building all sorts of little apps, so it's going to help them. And it's also probably just the abject end of
Yeah.
privacy concerns. Like you're seeing a few spasms at the end with like Zoom privacy, but it's curtains. Like governments right now, state governments, local, are developing apps that track your location. It's done. Like,
Right. And it's all Bill Gates' fault, as far as I understand.
yeah, Bill Gates and the Trilateral Commission.
Yeah.
But what's the next
I mean,
story?
the next story is, I mean, also about coronavirus, not shockingly, but I mean, this is about the Paycheck Protection Program, which we're going to deep
You
dive
down with
into.
PPP?
Yeah, we're going to deep dive into at the end of
You
this
missed it, dude.
episode.
You're
But
spit.
this
Yeah, you
is,
know me.
yeah, you know me.
Yeah, there you go.
This is out of Bloomberg. So the headline here is startups are scrambling for access to $349 billion in relief loans. This is interesting because it looks a little bit different for a startup trying to apply for this than it does for, you know, your favorite coffee shop or your favorite Italian restaurant in town, which has certainly suffered a great deal as a result of people not being able to dine in their restaurants and having limited options for takeout and delivery. So the Paycheck Protection Act is geared at companies that have 500 or fewer employees, if you don't know that already. But it also has
If you
pretty
don't know that
heavy.
already, you probably aren't going to get the money from this. Just to be
Yeah,
clear.
well, yeah, you probably don't have a business or have to worry about
Yeah.
that, but you should at least hope that if you work for a company that has less than 500 people, that your employer has in some way attempted to do it, because it probably means some extra job security for you. But it's interesting, and Joe, you and I were talking about this earlier. It's interesting when startups apply for this, because it actually puts some rules around, you know, what you can do going forward if
Yeah.
you want to get the loan forgiven. But then in terms of these companies that are trying to get to very specific valuations so that they can get to you know, a Series A or a Series B round of financing,
Or go
actually may
public.
hurt them in the long run, or go public. Yeah, eventually IPO. It puts them in a bad position to have to say, like, yes, we were dramatically adversely affected by COVID-19, so much so that we had to apply a forgivable government loan. I think that's going to affect some valuations down the road.
Yeah, well, the other thing in the application that they talk about is you have to acknowledge that the outbreak adversely impacted or threatened your
Right.
business in some
Yeah,
way. And so
caused a
the problem
significant
is,
hardship. Yeah.
yeah, when investors or the public markets go back and do due diligence, you're the argument is, do you take a write down for taking this money? And remember, many venture backed startups carry 8 months, 12 months, 24 months of operating capital on hand. So they don't
Right.
actually need the money. They have a long runway to play with.
Well, the problem actually is the startups that are coming to the end of a financing round or the end of some runway are actually put at a significant disadvantage here, because those are going to be the businesses that are more likely to apply for relief under the Paycheck Protection Program. Companies that, you know, closed, like you said, an 18 or 24-month round of financing, just got their capital. They're not going to worry about applying for a 2.5 times payroll loan, because they're already fully capitalized. They'd rather not take the hit from it. So it actually puts the companies that have been around longer in this case probably at a disadvantage,
Yeah.
because they're the ones having to worry about, can we keep payroll up to the Series A or the Series
Well,
B?
the other part of this is, what is everybody else in the market doing? If every other
Is it
company does
socially
it,
acceptable? Yeah.
yeah, if every other company does it, then you really don't take a markdown because everybody did
Yeah.
it.
If
And it's
every
just
tech
seen as
company
a,
in
yeah,
5 years is dealing with, like, oh, yep, they had to do this, then it
yeah.
doesn't matter for anyone. If you're the lone wolf that did it, then you're
Or if,
probably in a bad spot.
20% of companies, or you did it and a competitor didn't, it could be an
Sure.
issue.
Sure. Moving on, out of Reuters, Amazon to delay Prime Day event due to coronavirus. This
Another
is,
casualty.
yeah, I mean, to me, this is almost a non story, but, you know, a lot of people think Prime Day is a really big deal. Mostly my experience with shopping on Prime Day has been great deals on stuff I don't need or want.
I mean, you know what Prime Day is for Amazon? Prime Day is a way that they goose their Q2 earnings.
Yeah.
And no other
Yeah.
retailer is
It's a
able to
summer
count.
Christmas for them. Yeah.
Yeah. Which is smart. I think, Amazon, and we've done a podcast on this, Matt. I don't know if you heard it. It's when it was a few days after the baby was born. But Amazon is really, prime, pun intended, to just kind of take over the world after this. You're
Hmm.
about to drop, $1,200 into American households. They're not going to go to the store. The only way they can get delivered is through Amazon.
They're all going to
Uh,
buy $1,160 worth of toilet paper. So,
Yeah, the big, the tech lash is going to start to abate. So Amazon's going to be freer to make some of these moves that they haven't really tied together. So tying together their, video product with their, shop. There's just so many pieces in there that they're going to be able to start to bring together that, Amazon, when you look back on this in 2 or 3 years, this is going to be the moment where Amazon went from being like, a really big company to potentially the world's first 2 trillion or $3 trillion company.
Yeah, the interesting thing about Prime Day too is it is a genuinely great time to get a deal if you are in the market to get an Amazon product, right? So if you're looking to get an Echo product, if you're looking to get something that Amazon makes, the best deals you're going to find on Prime Day are going to be the stuff that Amazon directly
Well,
owns or
I mean, Matt,
supplies.
there's an argument to be made here that one of the results of this is going to be that Amazon store is going to get washed out of a lot of non-Amazon products, because in a world where acquiring a product from China, if you can't do the Alibaba to Amazon flip, which is 70% of Amazon, very easily, or it's more expensive, that cuts off a lot of competitors. But Amazon can buy at a large enough scale and
Yeah.
subsidize all the cost along the supply chain to still be extremely
Or
cost
just outright
competitive,
own the factory in China that's producing the things.
or own the factory in America.
Yeah.
And nobody's looking at Amazon to do this, but I think you have to. If you start to bring manufacturing back to the United States in a significant way, it's not going to be, you and I just start a little startup factory and take a contract. The way that's going to work is Amazon's going to use the same know-how and tech they've used to develop these warehouses and apply it to different types of factories where they can
Well,
switch over product lines.
and the same political savvy to go in and get a tax credit if they're building new manufacturing
Well,
jobs and
look, this is my other argument for Amazon is a lot of their regulatory issues are about to disappear. They're on the
yeah.
cusp of being the largest employer in dozens of
Well,
congressional
they're about to
districts.
find an environment where the government is no longer adverse to them like widely succeeding and is tripping over itself in order to help them sell things in America
Yeah.
to just
Um,
simply stimulate the economy.
but I mean, the interesting thing is if Amazon ends up owning the factory and they complete, which they've really not done so far, but if they own factory all the way up to distribution, you're dealing with probably what is going to be the world's first totally integrated vertical and horizontal monopoly.
Yeah, I mean, but also buying a factory or making a factory has never been cheaper than it probably is going to be for the next 2 months, at
Oh,
least in
true.
the last
Yep.
decade.
True. They can
Um,
hire Elon Musk to tell them how to do it.
exactly. So I mean, I think that's a good point, like owning the factory. Now, I will say there hasn't been a lot of evidence that, outside of the first couple weeks, there's a big issue with getting products that are being supplied from China. So talking about that
Not yet,
Alibaba to
because
Amazon flip,
the trade the trade fallout from this hasn't happened. And I'm
right?
not saying everything is going to stop coming from China. That's clearly not true.
But it could get more
But
expensive or get harder. I agree.
what you will have is probably the domestic subsidies going to producers of a given number of supplies of manufactured product in the United States. So the obvious one is going to be medical protective equipment.
Hmm.
Uh, but once Congress starts opening that up to look at it, anybody with a good special interest group and a checkbook is going to get put on that list of subsidized products.
Sure.
And so you go very quickly from it makes a lot of sense to go to China to source some things to maybe it doesn't make sense financially. Oh, and also supply chain stability. We know if it's being manufactured in Tennessee or Nebraska, that we can pretty much always get it.
Mhm. I mean, part of that also probably depends on what deal China decides to cut out of all this. They're going to be forced to give something to probably other countries, particularly the United States, as a result of this. So the deal that China cuts could end up being, maintaining current trade in order to forgive U.S. A certain portion of U.S. debt to China. I mean, there's a lot
I
of
mean,
things
that
that
would
could be
be
on the
wouldn't that
table.
be the ultimate like Trump maneuver though?
Yeah,
To write down a massive amount of debt.
yeah, no, I
Yeah.
mean that I think
Yeah.
is the play. That's what a lot of people are talking about is the smartest thing that we can probably ask for from China and be in a realistic position to get, is a multi-hundred billion or even multi-trillion dollar debt forgiveness in exchange for not
Yeah.
tightening the noose on trade restrictions or something.
Well, and then also you probably start to put some domestic investment restrictions in place, because I think another piece of the fallout that's going to come from this in the media space pretty heavily is what is the involvement of American media conglomerates with the Chinese government.
Yeah,
And like this is one of the things that um we miss is the Chinese government. It's not like a pseudo communist command and control
no,
government. It is a hardcore old school communist government, and they are been extremely intelligent about
with some
where
pretty
they do
stickers
business and make
slapped on it.
investments. Yeah. So how do you protect or prevent American media from becoming a proxy arm of Chinese interest?
You don't download TikTok. That's how.
You don't download TikTok. Well, I mean, so legit question: do you go see Disney movies? Right? Disney is got a lot of criticism in the last 8 months for changing scripts to please Chinese regulators so it could be released into that market. So I think as far as media goes, it's going to be a really complex situation, more so than the trade itself. But how do you want to do deals that limit Chinese influence via financial pipes in the American economy or in the American society?
And I think some of that will work out just kind of on its own, right? So, I mean, Disney's had the luxury of being able to focus on China because they've had the U.S. market so locked down, right? It's easy to go focus on the Chinese market when you're going to put out 7 multi-billion-dollar blockbuster studio movie hits a year, right? Like they're not going to have that this year. The only way they're going to be able to do it, and you heard Bob Iger talking about this, I think yesterday or even Monday, that they're going to have to make the decision probably to put some additional like feature theater releases straight to Disney Plus or straight to digital purchase only, just because they've got to release them. They can't hold them all until 2021 or hold them all until the Christmas season.
Yeah,
So they're going to have to do,
because then they dilute their
yeah, I
own
mean, they're going to have
product.
to do stuff in order to not to win back. I'm not saying like the US audience has gone anywhere in terms of their feelings or sentiment towards Disney or the content it produces, but just in
No,
terms of
but look,
convincing them to consume it.
well, the problem Disney has isn't the content consumption piece. It's the environment in which the content is consumed.
Sure. Yeah,
Disney's
yeah,
most
yeah.
profitable 40% of Disney revenue comes from parks. But
Parks and merchandise, though, that's an important distinction. The merchandise is a really big part of that. It's not all park revenue. The
um
mer-
so
I'm pretty
so
sure the merchandise is in that category too, and that includes sales of all merchandise, not just merchandise at the parks.
yeah, I mean I'll double check on what licensing was. I wrote about it in the newsletter last week. So you have 40% there, then you have a cruise line, then you have theaters, which are also a group experience. And one of the things about the content is it is more valuable to release your movie into the theater than it is to release it direct to your streaming service. It
Absolutely.
becomes very hard to recover the investment you made for in a theatrical release if you're going to go straight to a content stream.
Even more so in an environment where you just gave away a year for free to millions of customers in that
Yeah.
streaming service.
And also don't forget Disney is taking a hit on ESPN.
Yep.
ESPN doesn't have
Has
live
nothing to
sports.
produce. Yeah.
So
The
there's a lot
worst
of
part about ESPN is all it is 24 hours a day now. Like the worst part of
yeah,
endless talking head shows where
is
they
what they
discuss
have.
sports, that's now the only thing that can exist on the platform.
Um, so I think it's probably enough on Disney. By the way, I think Disney will ultimately recover and be fine. They have so much leverage in media; it's going to keep them protected from potential buyouts. They have an enormous amount of political leverage, so I think that company recovers. They've also been smart. They took out some bonds, so they have cash on hand. So they'll probably weather the storm. But that company likely looks very different over the course of the next year than it does now.
It does. The last piece in our news segment is out of Axios again, and it's entitled What Americans Are Buying Online During the Coronavirus Outbreak. So, Joe, you've looked at this already, but I mean, let's talk about what the biggest categories here. I mean, the biggest online shopping growth has been in protection products. That makes perfect sense. People, a month ago were not worried about buying masks on Amazon or anywhere else.
Yeah.
Toilet paper, of course, no one seems to still be able to explain that one.
Over the counter drugs and then non perishables are the things people are into online. You know what I think is interesting, and fitness equipment also is up huge, as well as computer orders and apparel. What I think is interesting about what the purchasing behavior you're seeing is we have this trend where has supply chains for our retailers went to being effectively on demand supply chains or just in time supply chain. American households have moved the same way as well. So, you went from a time 30 or 40 years ago where it would have been typical to have a week, maybe 10 days of food on hand for the typical American family to because of the cost of dining out lowering because people live in cities and have smaller spaces, that maybe only having 3 or 4 days or 1 or 2 days food on hand is a thing. And so,
Mhm.
one of the things I think we're not appreciating going forward is the potential for consumption habits to change and for people to begin dedicating more of their income to food. Like historically, the last 20 or 30 years, the lowest cost of food in human history is what we've seen. So, our food consumption patterns have been built around basically what do I want to eat?
Right.
Because price hasn't been a significant barrier and availability hasn't been a significant barrier.
I mean, the computer category there is interesting as well. In fact, my mom just a few minutes ago called and asked about a new computer for herself. She's getting ready to retire, and she's in the education field. But Dell, knowing that teachers have moved to remote teaching from home online, noticed that there's a lot of teachers that were just operating from before this maybe an iPad or even their phone or an old computer. They were using their primary desktop
Yeah.
computer in their classroom, and didn't necessarily have a solution for doing it at home. So Dell, I mean, I'm sure other companies are doing this too, but is offering really steep education discounts right now to get devices quickly into the hands of teachers at home. So my mom was calling because she is about to retire, wants to buy a new device, and thinks it's probably a good time to pull the trigger on it because there's a lot of opportunity in the price field. But I think this probably helped people um, that previously didn't have to worry about having a strong or powerful home computer all of a sudden need to think about that, right? If you were in a position where your out of the office work was limited to mostly replying to emails or phone calls, it wasn't mandatory that you had a really strong laptop computer or desktop computer at home. You were fine having your smartphone and maybe a tablet. But now all of a sudden, like, you've got to do some real work at home, and maybe your company doesn't offer laptops to its employees.
And take that one step further, Matt. I think what you're going to see, and I also wrote about this in a Medium post, is as work changes and remote work becomes more common, not only are you going to see investments made in the technology, you're also going to see additional investments in the peripherals,
Yeah.
in the mics, in the lighting,
You cannot
in the
find
cameras.
a USB webcam anywhere in the country right now.
Yeah. Uh,
Best Buy doesn't have any in stock. Amazon doesn't have any in stock. Like, you cannot find, especially a Logitech one, which is like kind of the trusted brand name
yeah.
there. You cannot find an
Yep.
external
It's
webcam.
because everybody, your ability to make an impression now is limited to this chest up
Yeah.
screen that we're all in, and so it needs to be well lit. It needs to look a good background. Obviously, I'm not great at back. I'll draw a picture on this one next time. Not great at background, but you're gonna see people paying more and more attention to this stuff. Has professional standards and
Well, in
common
some
practices start to
cases,
develop around these things.
yeah, I mean, in some cases, it may be people literally operating with devices that just don't have a camera feature built in at all. So, I mean, if you're operating on a desktop computer at home, especially like a Windows desktop
Yeah.
computer, there's a pretty decent chance you don't have a webcam installed in your monitor.
Yeah, and look, I think probably one of the net results of this is it's going to harm the cut rate computer market because you're
Yeah.
going to have people coming back to the laptop. If you think you're going to have to worry, you're going to have people moving back to the laptop. And if they move back to the laptop, they're going to try and get a decent laptop.
Hmm. Yeah,
Um,
I mean, they're going to feel like they need to get something that's going to last for a few years. It's probably good for Apple, right? I mean, it's
yeah.
probably a decent time for
Look, if
Apple
you're
to
going
be
to be a
putting out.
remote worker, like you should you would expect that, especially as you move up like the skill range in remote work, you should expect to see the equipment people are investing in for themselves start to get better and better, or
Yep.
the equipment companies are buying for their employees start to get better and better.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm sure there's plenty of companies that are trying to upgrade their equipment, that are having the same struggle that consumers are right now. That there's not 1,000 webcams for them to buy from one of their
Yeah.
normal suppliers to distribute out to their remote workforce. Like the things are, I mean, the system was just not ready to have this demand for something that is, mostly an every once in a while purchase, because people that need webcams buy computers with webcams in them for the most part.
Yeah, look, I think one of the things, and I know we have to wrap up. We're at about, I think, 30 minutes here. One of the long-term trends, look, whether you're in the bull case, the bear case, or the base case for how this all ends up over the next year, one of the things that's pretty clear to me is you've introduced everybody now to remote work.
Hmm.
So this used to be like Tim Ferriss, 4-hour work week. That'd be fun to do, or maybe you do remote work occasion. But now everybody's been introduced to remote work, the benefits of it, the
And not
cost.
while sipping their matcha on a beach somewhere either.
Yeah, yeah,
While
like
doing it with children screaming and dogs barking.
sure, real life
Yeah.
remote work. And I think one of the pieces that's come is we're developing conventional, we don't realize it, but we're developing common conventions around how we interact in Zoom meetings, and about how we use Slack channels, and about how, we try and keep things out of email. Now that's coming to everybody, up and down the line. So, I think what you'll see, I heard someone refer to this as like the Generation V, Generation Virtual, is this common acceptance of, virtual meetings and virtual interactions as substitutes for the real thing. Now, I'm skeptical that you can move all work to that, but I think what we will find is very clearly work where the work product is discrete, like it's a very defined unit, and where the work product is relatively flexible in the time you do it, are things that are open to be transitioned to at home work, as businesses try and not run cubicle farms or not run open office floor plans where the employees are stacked on each other.
Yeah, I mean, if you're in the commercial property space, you're probably gonna have a bad year.
Yeah, or not, because you're going to have some companies that just choose to buy the extra space.
Yeah.
But I think for most, that's not going to be the
Mhm.
route they go.
Anything else you wanted to cover on this episode?
So there was this last article. This was out of Axios on change in page views by content category for
Mhm.
select publishers. Uh, I think the three big things that are notable here: shopping up 247%, health and fitness up 170%, personal finance up 116. What's down? Religion and spirituality down about 9%, and then I just zoomed myself out here. Uh, and then family and parenting is down 36%. Which you would expect, family and parenting to maybe be a little higher given the situation, but what people are doing is shopping, looking at health and stress stuff, and then personal finance.
I mean, I think most people's, goals of doing it perfectly or better or whatever have just kind of gone out the window, and now it's just about survival, and
Yeah.
there's not a whole lot of parenting tip articles out there about just getting through the damn day.
Yeah. Um, so I think these are interesting trends. Like if you're a marketer, to start shaping messages around how can you
Yeah.
shape messages about what's cool to buy. Hopefully it's your product. Health, fitness, great time to be in the virtual health fitness space, obviously, and then personal finance.
So, I mean, what would be interesting to me is in that shopping category to see some sort of breakdown of, what percentage of that is people moving from a purchase that they were normally going to make in person,
Yeah.
just moving it online, right? So, I mean, Instacart shipped, that kind of stuff, where they were forced to go shop for it online, and what percentage of it is, people browsing or killing time, or in
Yeah.
in what
It,
cases they're buying something that they wouldn't
I
have normally bought.
I would have a theory that you would think that this is related to substitution. It looks like a lot of things people are still going out to buy at like the grocery store because it's out of stuff. What I think is going on is, as you've increased time on device and browsing time, looking leads to buying. And so they're looking to pass time, and that leads accidentally to buying more stuff.
Mhm.
I think a lot of the needs you're talking about, people are still running out to the Home Depot or to the grocery store, the Costco, and trying to fill those.
Yep. All right. Anything else you want to cover for our wonderful listeners out there who are consuming hopefully even more of our content because they're home quarantined with not as much to do?
Consume more. I don't.
Okay. With that, thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of the podcast of Record. If you haven't had the chance, there's some great episodes from the last few weeks that I haven't had the chance to be part of, but even
You
some
should listen
daily
to them. They're
ones.
pretty good, Matt.
Yeah, even some daily ones that Joe and producer Kyle, who will always remember fondly in our hearts, did together. But check it out. Make sure to check us out at the podcastofrecord.com. Sorry, just podcastofrecord.com. If you want to reach out, if you've got questions or suggestions, and of course, leave a rating or review in your favorite podcast app of choice. That helps more people discover the show. Thanks for tuning in, and we will catch you next week.